Imagine this. In the blazing heart of the Sahel, under a sun so fierce it cracks the ground, hundreds of trucks roll out of Burkina Faso's capital. But they're not carrying weapons, not gold, not fuel. They're carrying fruit, bananas. Piled high, stacked by the crate, loaded in convoys like treasure on wheels. And then comes the strangest sight of all. Soldiers, villagers, even children digging shallow pits in the desert. Into those pits go the bananas, ripe ones, overripe ones, even spoiled ones, buried under the sand as if the desert itself were being fed. At first glance, it looks like madness. How could a country where hunger has been a constant shadow choose to bury food? Why would President Ibrahim Traoré, a man celebrated as a bold defender of African sovereignty, order such an act? The answer is shocking. Because those bananas were not being wasted. They were being weaponized. This is Project Green Pulse, perhaps the boldest agricultural gamble Africa has seen in decades. And if it succeeds, it could rewrite the rules of survival, challenge billion-dollar corporations, and prove to the world that what looks like weakness can actually be power. The beginning of a strange revolution. It all started in early 2025 in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. At first, whispers spread about a new government initiative with a strange name, Project Green Pulse. Nobody understood what it meant. But when the convoys began moving, people saw it with their own eyes. Truck after truck, not carrying soldiers or fuel, but bananas. Traders, farmers, and cold storage depots emptied their stocks. Within days, over 100 tons of bananas were collected, and their destination was not the markets but the desert. There, in the harsh Sahel sun, pits were dug into lifeless soil, and one by one, bananas were poured in. Some were arranged in neat rows, others simply dropped in heaps like yellow treasure sinking into the dust. Children laughed as they carried bunches on their heads. Elders whispered prayers, unsure whether to bless or curse this act. Soldiers stood guard, not against an enemy, but against doubt itself. Because many could not believe what they were seeing. "Why bury food when people are hungry?" shouted traders. "This is madness," cried farmers. "Bananas are life," they said. "How can life be thrown away?" But to the government, this was not destruction. This was creation. The president's gamble for years, Burkina Faso had been chained to imported fertilizers. Each shipment arriving from foreign ports carried not only a price tag, but conditions, debts, and dependence. President Ibrahim Traoré made a decision. Burkina Faso would no longer kneel. Instead of waiting for ships, the nation would use what it already had. Organic matter, fruit, waste. And in that vision, the banana, one of Africa's most common crops, became more than food. It became a weapon of survival. Traoré declared, "We will feed our soil the way we feed our people, with life, not chemicals. With what is ours, not what is dictated." It was a bold statement, part science, part symbolism, and completely defiant. From skepticism to celebration, at first, the operation felt surreal. In some villages, the burial of bananas looked like a funeral. People stood silently, unsure. But soon, the atmosphere began to shift. Drums echoed as pits were filled. Songs rose as children tossed bananas into the ground. Teachers told students, "This is not waste. This is history. Bananas feed the earth, and when the earth eats, we all eat." A new phrase spread across the Sahel. Bananas are food for the soil. Some villagers even gave the project nicknames. Planting yellow trees, or feeding the desert. And yet, beneath the laughter and music, a burning question lingered. Was this really science or just desperation wrapped in symbolism? The science of a banana to outsiders, a banana looks like soft sugar, a sweet snack. But to scientists, it's a package of life. The fruit is packed with potassium that strengthens plant roots. Its peel is rich in phosphorus, essential for seeds to sprout. Magnesium in the flesh fuels photosynthesis, and its carbon compounds feed the microorganisms that bring soil back to life. In other words, when a banana rots, it doesn't die, it transforms. Brazilian farmers had already used banana stalks to increase maize yields by 40%. Indian villages had turned sandy plots into gardens using nothing but banana pits. If it worked there, why not here in the Sahel? That was the question Traoré asked his advisors. Their answer, yes. Bananas could awaken the desert. More than agriculture, a political message. But this project was never just about soil, it was about sovereignty. Every year, Burkina Faso spends millions importing fertilizers tied to foreign corporations. Those corporations profit not only from the land, but from the dependency they create. By burying bananas, the president was sending a clear message. We will not beg, we will not borrow, we will build with what we have. The banana, once a symbol of fragility, even mockery, as in the insult Banana Republic, was now reclaimed as a symbol of defiance. The world reacts inside Burkina Faso. The movement began to grow. School children proudly carried bananas to burial pits. Farmers, skeptical at first, began to hope. For many, it felt like a festival. But outside the country, the laughter was loud. In Paris, headlines mocked the project. Banana Republic literally. Cartoons showed villagers worshipping piles of fruit. On French TV, one anchor smirked. Perhaps next they will bury baguettes. In Washington, think tanks dismissed it as political theater. But not everyone was laughing. In Moscow, state media called Traoré a visionary. In Beijing, experts quietly praised the project, recalling their own traditions of using organic waste to restore soil. In Ankara, commentators hailed it as dignity in the soil, dignity in the heart. And across Africa, crowds cheered. Radio debates erupted, memes spread, at first mocking, then transforming into pride. Burkina Faso was no longer a punchline, it was a pioneer. The first results, and then came the moment that silenced some critics. Within just 3 weeks, green shoots appeared in the test plots. Fields that had been dead for decades sprouted millet and sorghum. Farmers touched the soil and said, "It feels alive again." On state TV, images of seedlings breaking through the dust played on repeat. The message was clear. This was not madness. This was resurrection. One farmer named Adama, who had tried and failed to grow crops for 10 years, summed it up. "I thought my land was dead. After the bananas, my children may eat here again." But just as the soil began to show life, another story surfaced. A revelation that turned Project Green Pulse from a strange experiment into a dangerous challenge to global power. Because behind the science and symbolism, there were whispers of money. Big money. And those whispers threatened to expose a hidden war. Not just over bananas, but over who truly controls Africa's future. Subscribe now, because what comes next is not just about Burkina Faso. It's about the chains of dependency being broken, one banana at a time. When the first green shoots broke through the dust, hope spread like wildfire across Burkina Faso. But just as farmers celebrated, a storm was gathering far beyond the Sahel, because buried under those bananas was not only potassium and phosphorus, but also a direct challenge to billion-dollar corporations and the foreign powers that protect them. And soon, the world would realize that Project Green Pulse was not just about soil. It was about sovereignty. It was about power. And it was about money, the leak that changed everything. Weeks after the first seedlings sprouted, a document leaked online. Allegedly from a French diplomatic cable, it revealed something explosive. European fertilizer corporations were alarmed by Burkina Faso's banana project. Why? Because if it worked, Africa's dependency on imported chemicals could collapse, a market worth billions every single year. The memo warned, Project Green Pulse, if successful, threatens to destabilize fertilizer trade flows and undermine European leverage in West Africa. Even more shocking, the cable hinted at something deeper. Some analysts speculated the banana burial was not just about agriculture. They whispered it could be a cover for building biofuel reserves, or even redirecting funds away from corporate-controlled markets. Suddenly, what had looked like a quirky agricultural experiment now appeared as a direct strike at the invisible chains that bind Africa to foreign interests. The people's reaction inside Burkina Faso. Reaction split. Some villagers felt betrayed. While we dig in the sun, are they hiding billions behind bananas? Opposition figures asked. Others dismissed the rumors as Western propaganda designed to smear a project that was clearly working. A farmer in Kaya said, They laughed before. Now they fear. That is proof enough. But whether true or not, the leaked cable changed everything. Burkina Faso's banana project was no longer just a national experiment. It had become a battlefield in a silent war over Africa's right to feed itself. The soil speaks, and then, just as rumors swirled, the government released hard evidence. Official reports showed that fields enriched with bananas had seen a 60% increase in fertility in just 6 weeks. Soil acidity dropped dramatically. Microbial life tripled. Millet and sorghum sprouted where nothing had grown in over a decade. To prove it wasn't propaganda, journalists, local and foreign, were invited to see the plots themselves. Cameras rolled as reporters stood in ankle-high green chutes where once there had been dust. One villager whispered, touching the young plants, "We buried fruit, and the earth gave us life." The message was undeniable. Bananas were not just symbolism. They were science, the economics of independence. But Traoré didn't stop at science. He exposed the money. For years, Burkina Faso had spent over $100 million annually on imported fertilizers, tied to contracts with multinationals. Each shipment was a chain, economic, political, and psychological. By replacing even 30% of those imports with organic solutions like bananas, the country could save millions, redirecting money to schools, hospitals, and defense. Standing before cameras, the president declared, "A nation that feeds its soil, feeds its freedom. We will not let our survival be dictated by ships docking in foreign ports." The statement hit harder than any speech he had made before. To his supporters, it was electrifying. To his critics, it was dangerous. Mockery turns to fear at first. Western media kept mocking. British commentators called it political theater. American think tanks published papers warning Burkina Faso was risking hunger for symbolism. But beneath the laughter, unease was spreading. Because the numbers didn't lie, the soil was responding. The crops were returning. And if Burkina Faso could do it, what would stop Mali, Niger, or Chad from trying the same? That was when the tone began to shift. A French newspaper warned bluntly, "If Burkina Faso insists on this path, it risks isolation from the global agricultural system." Translation? The West was no longer laughing. It was worried. Africa awakens. Meanwhile, across Africa, the banana project was becoming a beacon. In Mali, crowds chanted Traoré's name as if he were their own leader. In Niger, radio stations debated whether they could launch a similar program. In Senegal and Guinea, memes that started as jokes turned into symbols of pride. Suddenly, Africans saw what the West feared. This wasn't about bananas. It was about freedom. A 60-year-old farmer, Mariam, put it simply. "For years I sold bananas for coins. Now I bury them for my grandchildren's bread. Which is the greater wealth?" Her words carried more power than any speech. Because this was not just science. This was imagination reborn. A soldier's realization. Among the most powerful stories came from a young soldier named Solomon. On local radio, he recalled, "When I first carried crates of bananas into the desert, I thought it was pointless. I am a soldier. My duty is to fight, not to farm. But when I saw the soil change, when I saw children planting with their hands, I realized this was also war. The war for independence. We bury fruit, but we are sowing freedom." His words spread across the nation, becoming a rallying cry for a new generation. The global South takes notice. Moscow called it innovation. Beijing praised its ecological wisdom. Ankara applauded its dignity. Even Cuba and India pointed to their own histories of survival through agroecology. And suddenly, Burkina Faso was no longer alone. A quiet network of support began forming. Outside the orbit of Western corporations, the fight ahead, but with success came danger. Reports surfaced that fertilizer lobbies in Europe were pressuring their governments to reconsider aid to Burkina Faso. Disinformation campaigns began online, painting the project as a stunt. The battle was no longer just in the soil. It was in the boardrooms of multinationals, in the corridors of foreign ministries, in the propaganda wars of media empires. Because if a banana could break dependency, what else could? A symbol greater than itself. The truth is, Project Green Pulse was about more than agriculture. It was about imagination. For decades, Africans had been told survival depended on ships from abroad, crates of aid, sacks of fertilizer, strings always attached. Dependency was not just economic, It was psychological. But then came bananas in the desert, and suddenly the logic broke. What was mocked as absurd became proof that solutions could come from within. That shift, invisible but powerful, may be the greatest harvest of all. Because once a people believe they can survive without permission, no empire can rule them the same way again. The next question, and so the question is no longer, will bananas work? That answer is already visible in the green fields of the Sahel. The real question is, what happens when this independence collides directly with global corporate power? Will fertilizer giants tolerate a world where Africa no longer buys from them? Or will they fight back, economically, politically, even covertly? That is the cliffhanger Burkina Faso faces today. And that is why Project Green Pulse is bigger than food, bigger than fruit. It is a declaration. A fragile yellow object mocked by the world has become a weapon of sovereignty, and the world is watching. This is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. If bananas can restore the desert, what happens when Africa turns to rivers, to wind, to sun? What if the continent begins reclaiming every element of survival on its own terms? Stay with this story because the next chapter is coming, and it could change everything.